Welcome and a very, very joyous Friday to you. You know, we've got something exciting on the dockets for today, a little bit interesting. You may think that I'm sitting here with a mirror and that's just my image over there. Actually, it isn't. It's a very good friend of mine, Don Yanik. Now, let me tell you before he gets a chance to talk how we met. As most of you know, I have done a lot of directing and performing locally and other places. Um, I'd seen a number of shows over the years, and the sets that I absolutely gravitated toward all had an attribution to them of one person. That person. Well, I told Tenor that if I was going to direct this, there's only one person that I wanted to design the set for the show, The Humans. Well, as fate would have it, it happened to be the last show that ACT put on with a totally live audience. And it happened to be one of the ones with the biggest audience attendance. So we hit a double header or whatever you call it. And I want to show you something. But first, one more, oh, maybe two more paragraphs. Um, Don and I have a tradition of cuppa. We just had one not more than half an hour ago where we had a cup of coffee and we chat. Sometimes he listens, sometimes I listen, sometimes both of us talk in tandem. Uh, but be that as it may, we were having a cuppa, and Don said, "Yeah, I'll have a cup of coffee with you, but I'm not committing to do this show." I had to audition for this turkey. Can you believe that? So, anyway, we have this conversation. I give him a list that should have made him run to the hills of, oh, several pages of, I want this, I want that, and this has to be here, and I need a light switch over here, and I need this, and I need that. And we talked a little bit about what we'd done in the past. And at the conclusion, question was, well, when do you want the drawings? That means I won and I passed my audition and I got cast. Excuse me, this is technological. I've got to take my devil tool, and I'm sure all of you have been through this, put the power off, tell it that I really didn't mean it and my fingers aren't wandering, and now we can do it in quietude. What can we do? I have got to show you this. Oh, Donald. His thing is on too.
I meant to see this properly.
The best intentions aft gang asunder, or words to that effect. This is what is known as a model. And before the actors even appeared, Don took every single thing that I had on my list, like how much space I wanted and the fact I needed 2 floors, took all of this, and just to show you how complete it is, actors have to get to the second floor. Audience never sees that. I'm giving you a behind the scenes view so that we knew how all of the actors could access the various parts of the stage and what needed to be done. Now, in the best possible world, this is how directors receive input from designers. So we're all on the same page. Um, oh, I just had to have a spiral staircase. Don, tell us how we got the spiral staircase. Oh, by the way, Don Yanik, hello. Tell us, how did we get that?
Well, we lucked out. It cost a great deal of money to buy one and assemble it. So I have friends in Jacksonville, Johnny Pettigrew, who was the technical director at FSCJ, and he had a staircase that was not in use at the time. So we had to sort of plan when we would get it and when we would be able to put it up and get it delivered up here to Fernandina. And Johnny was good enough to come up with two other students, and they assembled that thing very quickly. And it's very heavy, and it takes some getting used to for actors in particular to feel comfortable climbing up on a circular stair because the place where you put your feet is not necessarily wide enough.
No, actors had very big eyes the first rehearsal we actually went on stage. Uh, there was great trepidation in each step. And I was thinking, good heavens, my timing is totally off in the way I directed this. We got tighter and tighter. But now, what on earth does this have to do with C.S. Lewis? Well, before we even get there, Don, tell me a little bit of your background. Where did you move here to the island from, and what were you doing?
That I can tell you. You didn't tell me you were going to ask me that question.
I know I keep surprises from him.
Yeah.
It keeps our friendship fresh.
Well, I taught school. Oh, I'm out of the picture. I taught school, and I for a total of 50 years. That was a goal of mine to try to go that long. I began with elementary education. Loved every bit of that, except the times those little fifth and sixth graders got a little rambunctious. And then I decided I would help at a local community theater, knowing nothing about design and had no training in design. And I decided I needed, before someone would find out what I don't know, which was, I think, a fear of a lot of people, I decided that I needed training. So I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska at the time. And I took a costume class because that's my second area of interest. Then the professor there was able to get a full ride for one student at Southern Methodist University. And he asked me if I wanted to go. I asked my family about that, and we decided to go on an adventure. So for 3 years, I went to Southern Methodist, studied with Bill and Gina Eckhart, who were Broadway designers, and Ming Cho Lee, who totally changed my life, and ended up graduating, getting a job at the University of Arkansas as head of design for 3 years, and then I moved out here. We drove out to Seattle, and I just fell in love with Seattle. Taught there 30 some years, and I have a friend, Ken McCullough, who teaches now at FSCJ in Jacksonville, and I would come down here and visit, and he'd visit with me. And when I retired, he wanted me to move down here, and I didn't want to go to Jacksonville, I'm sorry to say. Trade one big city for another big city with horrific traffic. He said, then what about Fernandina? And I said, well, we used to come up here all the time to treat ourselves to the fine restaurants. And they are fine, very good restaurants. And I said, okay. And I'm here.
Well, you know, one of the secrets of the magnet of this place is I came fully intending to spend, I mean, not more than a couple of months on this little island in Florida. Folks, that was 3 decades ago.
Yeah,
and I'm leaving feet first. It's a spectacular place.
Yeah, it is.
Now, let's shift our focus back to C.S. Lewis and tell me something. Before I show these 2 photographs, how did you end up, I mean, C.S. Lewis, England, Oxford area, architecture, how did that happen?
Well, part of the training is that I loved was period decoration, because in graduate school you have to know period style and decoration for such things as this show, a contemporary place. Well, it wasn't so contemporary. The building was supposed to be much earlier than that. But a friend of mine at Seattle Pacific University was involved with the C.S. Lewis Foundation out of Redlands, California, and they bought this property that C.S. Lewis and his brother Warney owned, and decided they would repair it and have people show up and do all the work free of charge.
That scary mess is what Don first saw.
Yep.
And I'm trying to avoid the reflection, but you can see there's a bramble right in front. And golly, that roof doesn't look great. The windows look a little tacky. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's kind of dumpy looking.
Well, Kim Gilnet, who was the person who got me involved, they were ready to go inside the house and start work there. And he knew I knew period decor, and he asked me if I wanted to be involved with this. It would be about 5 or 6 weeks each summer, because the house was, well, not these first couple years, but the first couple years they were on the inside scraping wallpaper off, chipping paint away, making it so that workers could live in there on sleeping bags and so on. There was no furniture. But when it came time to think about how do we restore this place, he asked me if I wanted to do that, and I said yes. And no fee involved. They just paid my airfare every summer, and I got to stay in the house, as did 6 or 7 other people that were working on this project. And I became the restoration designer and volunteer coordinator, and giving everybody jobs to do.
Now,
I got to shop in all the bookstores and antique shops.
oh, that sounds like an ideal job.
It was.
Remember, that mess translates to what a scene designer does, what an architect does, ground plans, and you have basically that one section over here is the second floor, and then you have the first floor. And notice, I don't expect you to be able to see this all that well, because I realize that the reproduction isn't that great, but there's a central hall, and you have 2 rooms, one on either side, and you have a suite of rooms that goes to one side and a suite of rooms that goes up toward a final room on the end. It just kind of meanders higgledy-piggledy all over the place. That's the innards of that outward. Now, I want to show you something spectacular. The touch of Don. Which house would you rather live in?
A lot of people.
Well, when you even look at that garden, there was a garden designer back in the 1900s, really through the 20s and 30s, and her name was Gertrude Jekyll. And she had a philosophy of colors that used oranges, reds, primaries like blue, and the way you worked out color harmonies in, I love this, herbaceous borders. There's poetry in that. And she would tell you what plants to have, and she was very, very popular in England in that era. And her touch is definitely in those wonderful gardens.
The gardens were one of the first things that had to be worked out, because you don't see it well on that picture, but there's a beautiful rose arbor clear across the front of the house. And the reason it took 2 summers before I came on was they had to take all the shingles off the roof, their tile, all the windows out, clean all of that, put it back up before you could live there.
Now, I want to show you something. Part of a set designer's responsibility is to give elevation so that, again, the director and the actors can figure out what things look like. It's not only the model. Here on one of those rooms that I
That's
vaguely,
no, that's the common room.
the common room.
The living room.
Here is the conceptual drawing that Don did, and you'll notice there's true perspective in there. You feel like you could walk into that picture, basically. Fireplace, bookshelves, comfortable chair, desk, one of those bay windows at the front, really quite extraordinary. And let me show you something else. The kitchen. Now, you know, on all those home decorator shows, they've got an island and they've got granite countertops and I mean, just everything. Hmm. This was a fancy kitchen because it actually had cupboards. And tell us a little bit about what's that floor like?
The floor is quarry tile, and when we started work, we discovered that that's the original quarry tile. Underneath a coating of cement, someone who lived there in the meanwhile totally covered the tile. So we actually had to use chisels and hammers and chip all that away, and underneath was the beautiful red tile still.
Now, what's interesting, and I don't think I'd referenced this very well, um, the name of his home was the Kilns, Kilns. A kiln is a place where they fire bricks that would be used, or tiles rather, not really bricks, that could be used for flooring, that could be used for roofing, all of these things. And
Actually, they actually were brick kilns.
okay,
And when Lewis and his brother bought this house in 1930, and they lived there until he died 33 years or 36 years later, they never moved. It was on 8 acres of land, and the kilns were there still when he moved in, and they started to deteriorate and fall in. You know, the bricks would fall. All the kilns themselves were large structures. I don't think I had a picture in there of the property. I had a small one, perhaps, but that was it.
what you told me that, of course, those of you who know C.S. Lewis's story know that this confirmed bachelor who lived with his brother, eventually married Joy, a woman named Joy, who had two children from a previous marriage. Didn't you tell me something about where the kids like to play?
Oh, the kids would like to play in the kilns themselves, and they were forbidden to do that because they were falling apart. And then, you know, they were very tall. They weren't little kilns. They were several stories high. And I know Douglas, the son who was involved in all the Narnia films and stayed with the Lewis legacy, told stories of running out of that place because a brick was coming down from above. So they were not allowed to go in there after a while.
Target practice. Well, you know, the best thing in child rearing, of course, is the word don't, because to a child, that translates as do. At least my childhood it did. Now, I want you to see this mess. That's a photograph of what Don actually saw. This was the kitchen that he saw. And remember, the kitchen that he redesigned, it's really quite a switch. Um, all those HDC programs, you can see the before and after photographs quite clearly. Now, let's meander a bit. Tell me about, and I have to get photographs out of an album carefully and put them back again. What is this room with a desk with pictures? And
that is at the Wade Center, which houses a lot of memorabilia that was Lewis's. and in the background you saw a wardrobe. That wardrobe was carved by his father in Ireland, and that is presumably the wardrobe that is in the Narnia stories.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
It's a beautiful piece. I think you have a close up of that carving that he did
Somewhere, and hopefully I will be able to find it. But for those of you who can't see it, and I'm chasing a reflection here,
You do pretty good with that.
you'll notice that each of the panels has special carving on it. It's very intense. I'm going to try to find. We'll see. Oh, here. There's one picture I could show you the whole thing, but when I say exotic carving, they literally go in with a chisel and a mallet and chop this out from the surface of the wood downward to its interior. And an uh-oh is not something you can correct. This is really showing incredible craftsmanship, and it's oak. Now, those of you who've read the Narnia series, of course, there were 7 in that, all told. Do you know why? C.S. Lewis was a medieval scholar, and at that point in astronomy, there were only 7 recognized planets. And it wasn't until long after C.S. Lewis had passed that anyone put the key in the lock, turned it, and understood that each of those books referenced the mythology of one of those 7 planets. Incredible. Oh, well, I've got to show you this. That's an up-close picture of the wardrobe. Really quite extraordinary.
No, it wasn't in the attic in the house. It was right by the door leading into the kitchen of the Kilns. And we, of course, would not be able to get that back into the house. But we did find a large, uncarved wardrobe, because when children would come to the house, they want to obviously look at
Probably wanted to jump in, get behind the fur coats, and start looking for those characters in the lamppost and the snow.
It really worked out well. It just, the house is livable. It's still used as a study center for scholars that go to one of the colleges in Oxford, and they rent their rooms. And during the rest of the year, in the summer anyway, you can. They're not continuing. The house is finished. It's been dedicated and finished. But
you know, there's an interesting story that Don told me about the fire escape. What's the story on that? It's iron.
Well, the room up there is Lewis's bedroom, and it had this little fire escape put in because during the war, when the children had to be evacuated from London, they would take children into the out in the country, and he would take them out there with the telescope and show them the stars and name all the planets and this kind of thing. He loved doing that with kids. And then when he married Joy, her 2 sons became his stepsons. That's the library.
And that's the library. Remember, I showed you a photograph or a drawing, bookshelves either side of a fireplace. And look at something here. See that archway? That's a Romanesque arch. It references Roman design. And notice something. It starts, it rises, and it goes back down. It connects to the earth. If you're talking about a Gothic arch, think of hands in prayer, spread it out a little bit, and all of the lines will be focused heavenwards and up, not to a rounded hump, but a wonderful arrow that points all the way to heaven and beyond.
And I say something about the fireplaces?
You can say anything you want.
All right.
This is your show.
I need
I
to,
just talk a lot.
oh, that's interesting. I need to let you know that the house fell in disrepair, as you saw in that first photograph, because after Lewis died, Warney felt like he could no longer. Well, first of all, Joy died in 1960. Lewis died in 63, the same day that John F. Kennedy and Aldous Huxley died. And Warney could not, he didn't feel he could stay in the house anymore. So he rented a house about 4 blocks away, still in Headington Quarry area where this house is. And he decided to rent the place. It was no longer 8 acres because a nice little housing development sprang up, and all these little little duplexes were built. So he lived another 10 years, but the people that had actually bought the house tried to remodel it, and they changed the windows, they covered up all the fireplaces
Goodness.
except the one you saw, because that is a designed double car garage. We raised the floor, we built the fireplace after the style after some of the other fireplaces in the house, and every room had a fireplace.
Oh my goodness. Well, why did every room have a fireplace?
For warmth.
England can be chilly
very damp.
and damp.
And we found out when we were working on Joy's room, we decided the flooring was a parquet floor partially, and then wide boards like you would imagine in a house like that. But we decided to take it up. There was no insulation underneath. You just saw that earth. Talk about going back to the earth. So we had quite a time, because there are no extant pictures of the fireplaces. You would see in a photograph at the Wade Center that I had some copies of, the corner of a fireplace. So the person, we had a handyman that did all of those, and we could sort of figure out what it must have looked like. And there was a little footprint under there where the tile was, and they would put the fire. So they're pretty accurate. They fit the place. We didn't change the shape at the bottom or anything.
Well, going on into that area, and Don indicated that he did some of the design work for that. I love this photograph again. I keep going back to Narnia. It was, is, and always will be one of my favorite stories, continuing stories. I can't get enough of it. Don, tell us about that statue of the lion, and remember, Aslan
Yes.
was his name.
Well, when we dedicated the house in 2002, it was finished. There was a large celebration at the Sheldonian. Wonderful service, really.
What's the Sheldonian?
The Sheldonian is the place in Oxford where all the students graduate.
Ah.
It's very highly tiered,
Mm-hmm.
and just a beautiful, beautiful building. But we all decided, after we signed our names under one of the boards in Joy's room, that wasn't enough of a little token to leave. So I was out finding out all the decorations for the house, and I was in a little town called Burford, and I went into the antique store there, and I saw that, and it was Aslan. There's almost an identical image of that in the film. The lion standing is so tall and proud.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought that, and that was my gift to the Kilns.
But tell me something. Is it my aged eyes or what? I see a teacup. What's that doing there?
Well, can you show it? There's a picture in there of that in the corner. Like I said, even when designing for a show, yeah, this might be a little
okay.
better. I lost my thought.
We're teacupping.
Yeah, teacupping. Well, if you go in that room now, any of the renters can use the room. It's a livable space. but they can't move anything. So in the corner of the room where Joy kept her guns, shotguns, and she would use them.
Boy, that'll make the NRA
Yeah,
happy.
that'll make them very happy. But she would use them to scare off kids, because there's a pond behind. It's called Shelley's Pool.
There, tell me, there were no mounted trophies on the wall.
No.
Oh, just checking,
Not
you
of
know.
children anyway.
Oh, okay.
But that little teacup, I put that out as a decoration because you have to have little tables for your tea when it's served every day. And I put that little china teacup there and saucer and digestive cookies or biscuits they're called. And every time we had a tour, we would go over to that table to see if anyone had eaten the biscuits. Now they were quite stale because I only put new ones in as I found the plate empty. But some people, I thought those were they would be served tea and biscuits.
Well, I've got to tell you, one of my favorite things is McVitie's digestive biscuits, which I couldn't find anywhere over here. I mean, I spent a large portion of my youth in Europe, and then I traveled a great deal later. And I can attest to you that the dark chocolate McVitie's biscuits are pure sinful heaven. It's like a graham cracker with yummy chocolate all over it. And probably had I been in Oxford at the time after you put the cookies out, you probably would be able to find my DNA on that teacup. I wanted to show you something here, which I finally found. Don brought 3 volumes, and these are just tip of the iceberg. He has a lot more, of the photographs of this project. And I just had such a good time going through it, because remember, it's one thing to walk into Story and Song, see a shelf of books. Oh, there's a C.S. Lewis section. I'll pull this out. It's a book. But when you actually realize it is a book, but it's a book written by a man with a point of view, who woke up, who went to bed at night, who woke up, who sat in a chair, smoked a pipe, had thoughts, lived in a room, had to make choices about, okay, what are the curtains going to look like? What's this going to look like? Suddenly, a man and a place and an idea start to really become special. The Story and Song is a special place, and I just am happy that we're able to bring these things to you. Now, kitchen. Do you remember that photograph or the drawing that Don did? This is what it actually ended up being. Now, I'm not sure about this, but there, other side. You don't realize this, folks, but everything is vice versa. Left is left and right is left, and I don't know, it gets mixed up. But I think I know where I'm pointing, and I'm actually pointing to the opposite side. That stove, that's not an electric stove. You just turn it on and it gets hot and you watch your pot. Tell me, how does that stove work, Don?
It's a boiler.
It's a boiler, okay.
It's continually on. And you lift, if you look at the top of that buff-colored stove, there.
Top.
You lift those lids off, and you don't want to put your hand down on that little iron plate. You'll burn it.
Yeah.
Because the stove, it also heats the house. And that was donated by the AGA company. But we had to keep that other small stove that your other finger is on, the white one.
That's my finger over. That's the white kind of quote unquote normal.
Because we would
stove.
serve meals to everyone that was working there, and then we would have tours, and people would want a fancy meal that was held in the garage library. So we had to have both. Now that table is a replica. I did find
right in
pictures of this
back of the stove. Back of the stove.
Yeah. That table is a replica that I have built. I didn't build it. I had it built, and the legs turned because that was the work table in the kitchen. The cabinets were very simple.
See, that's an expanded version of the table and the placement. And what you see is as a white projection on this side,
Yeah.
on this side, is actually inset into a place that looks like a fireplace, and that would be the normal place for it to vent upward and outward. So this really, if you had somebody living there 24/7, this is the kind of thing that you would actually maintain on a very regular basis.
Well, he had a housekeeper, and cooked. The lady would come in. They did not do their own cooking.
Mhm.
He morning, but Maureen was her name, and the upstairs bedroom, the big double bedroom, was where Maureen and her daughter stayed when they came to live there.
Mhm.
So it's seen a lot of tragedy, that house, and a lot of joy. Not literally, I'm not talking about Joy Gresham, but she did bring a lot of life, and she changed the colors of everything. She loved blue and white. In fact, that's her original furniture we found.
Now wait, I'm going to show that to everybody.
She loved blue and white, and so we put her furniture back in her bedroom.
And you see, it's not unusual when you see antique furniture. That would have been not antique as an 18th century. That would be like older
40s
things,
maybe.
40s, yeah.
Very simple furniture.
But to make it, yours, sometime you just take a can of emulsion, that's French for paint, and slap a coat or two on so you could change it to the color that you really wanted. And notice, she loved blue. Well, she painted her furniture. The chair is blue, the mirror frame is blue, the chest is blue, the second chest is blue. Really quite lovely.
Well, there were only the only furniture we found in the house was her furniture and a settle, a very highly carved settle.
Settle is a bench with a back and arms on it, oftentimes against a wall.
The lid goes up so you can store
And
it.
in fact, here's a picture of a settle. And notice there are lines top and bottom close to the arms. That's a shelf that lifts up like a door, and you have a storage compartment within. But notice something. Do you remember in that wardrobe that we saw how heavily carved it was? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Look how this is carved.
The story there, that was in the house, in the garage with a lot of other junk. And when they came back the following summer, it was gone. So someone had broken into the house and stolen the settle. Well, I shopped around, and in some little village, I went in and saw that bench. And I think I told you the price of that. I can't remember. But I knew we couldn't afford it because our budgets were very limited. And we were primarily decorating the house in the 40s and 50s styles because that's when they would have lived there as a married couple and before that. But I saw that bench, and I came back to Stan Matson, who was the head of the foundation in California, and I said, well, I think I found a settle, and it will fit where the other one fit in the hallway, because this goes to the kitchen, and that's the front door that you see the green that leads out to the garden. So I asked, maybe we could ask Douglas Gresham, who was very active in
That's the stepson. That's Joy's son, who was the stepson of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, and he bought it and gave it to the house. He remembered it because he said it looked so much like the original. I kind of wondered if it was.
Well, the antiques market being what it is, it could be.
It could be.
I mean, it's
Could
not
be a
impossible.
reproduction.
Right. Just for the purists here, that's a much earlier design, but it was fabricated probably, I would guess, looking at it, not having it being in front of it and looking at how it's constructed, but I would imagine that that probably is a very late Victorian carving that replicated the mood, because that Renaissance era was one of the Victorian passions, shall we say, for furniture design of the Victorian era, which literally there is no such thing as a Victorian style. There's a Victorian period which spans the reign of Queen Victoria. Within that period, Gothic, Romanesque, Renaissance revival, arts and crafts, and on it goes. There were just Queen Anne. There were so many different uh, perspectives on design. Now, in closing, there is one thing I do want to be sure you see. This is on a postcard, and it's a postcard of a typewriter. What's the point of that, Don?
Well, it's Lewis's typewriter, and that was found in the attic, buried among the beams and the timbers. But that was what he and Warney would type all their work on. They also obviously they wrote first. Warney was just as accomplished as a published writer as was Lewis. He did many French war things.
Mhm. It was a very, very gifted family.
Yeah.
And when you look at that typewriter, what I read, I mean, his knowledge comes from experience. Mine comes from books I've read. Um, C.S. Lewis would oftentimes write out things in a notebook and in a green ink, hand it over to Warney, and then Warney, that this particular devil tool was not a favorite of C.S. Lewis's. It's like me and my cell phone. We have a very strange relationship. Um, well, we need to be calling our show to a conclusion. Don, I want to thank you so much for
Thank you.
doing this.
Well, thank you for asking. I was reluctant, as you know.
I know, but if he makes me audition, hey,
Oh, that's what
turnabout is
it's
fair
a
play.
turnabout.
You
All right.
got to do what I want you
Yeah,
to do.
okay.
So now we're sort of even, sort of.
I
He
wanna
still
say
owes me.
one more thing about designing an actual place
Okay.
like this and being selective about what you put in. It's the same thing that goes on when you design a set. You gave me from the very beginning of this discussion. You said you gave me 2 pages of things that you wanted,
Small writing.
and it was very small.
Oh,
And but you try to you take the information from the director and you have to embellish that.
yeah.
And sometimes you have to convince the director that the choice you made is a good one. Because when I do an interior, I try to envision for myself what pieces were there. What do we really need? And you buy things for the kitchen. We put things in the kitchen of that set. Very little furniture was called for, but I try to imagine what the occupants would have decorated, what they would have. Like we had no pictures.
No.
Uh,
The family had just moved in, and this was Thanksgiving, and their first Thanksgiving in the new apartment in Chinatown.
and what would have been there,
Yeah.
or might have been there.
And one of the interesting things on that, when you look at the script that was provided, it said specifically there was to be a sofa on the first level. That means on the stage. Then where you entered, which was what I'd call the second floor, there was supposed to be a chair. Well, Don and I nixed the recliner on that upper floor and used that on the first floor in place of the sofa. So those kind of adjustments, you'll never see the same show twice, ever, ever. And Don and I had a continual conversation about how we were seeing things. I'm sure I drove him nuts on this thing with you never believe how much time I spent on the kitchen counter because I wanted it shorter. Oh, no, 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 no. I want it longer. No, shorter. And I couldn't quite figure out how I wanted it. And finally, hate to admit this, we went back to the original thing that Don had put on the drawing, and we kept the
Because
size.
it was already built.
Well, that helped too. But from blocking, which is the director actually asks you to put certain things in motion. From what the director comes up with, we just had to do some adjustment. Now, I said this was the end, but you see, there's no end. It's just world without end. It goes on and on. We just sort of keep going. There's always something more.
Brings back the memories.
But Connor is standing over here with the shepherd's crook hook. He's shaking his head like no, but I can see inside his head is going like this. Folks, we've enjoyed sharing a little bit of this afternoon with you, and we encourage you to come back, visit again. Hey, there's much more where this came from. Till later.
Bye bye.
We'll see you. Bye bye.